The day I saw the tow truck, my heart stopped. It wasn't the usual dread you feel when you spot someone about to haul your car away. No, this was something else entirely. The man in the truck wasn't just there to take a vehicle, he was about to rip away a piece of my life, and in doing so, he'd spark a battle I never saw coming. I stood frozen at the window of my new home in Pinewood Heights, watching as the tow truck's heavy chains latched onto my RVMY sanctuary. The sound of metal scraping filled the air as it was hoisted off the ground. The RV had been parked outside my house, nothing unusual about it, but to the HOA it was a menace. To them, anything that didn't blend into their flawless, manicured world was a target. It didn't matter that this RV had once been a celebrity's retreat, a relic of a bygone era. To them, it was nothing but a blemish, a disruption to the pristine image they were obsessed with crafting. I'd only been in Pinewood Heights for a few weeks, barely unpacked, when the murmurs started. "Who parks an RV here?" they'd whisper. At first, I brushed it off as typical suburban fussiness, people fixated on neat lawns and matching mailboxes. But then the first notice from the HOA arrived, polite but sharp. "No RVs allowed on the streets. Remove it or we'll act." I'm not one to bow to petty demands, especially over something as harmless as parking. What I didn't realize then was that the HOA wasn't just a nuisance, it was a machine wielding power and control over this neighborhood like a dictator. And now they'd set their sights on me. This wasn't just any RV. It was my family's legacy, a mobile dressing room once owned by a famous actress who crisscrossed the country in it, always under the spotlight. She'd used it to prep for roles, to stay sane amid the chaos of fame. Now it was a slice of history I could claim. It was my refuge, a place to escape the grind of work, to find calm in creative UI. But the HOA didn't see that. To them, it was junk, an eyesore that clashed with their rigid VY shine of Pinewood Heights. When I first saw the tow truck roll up, I didn't freak out immediately. I thought it was a mix-up. I bolted outside, arms flailing, trying to stop them. But then I spotted Mrs. Carter, the HOA president, standing across the street, arms folded, staring me down. Her face was a mask, but her eyes glinted with something icy and deliberate that chilled me to the bone. She wasn't just observe why Inch was pulling the strings. The truck's wheels turned and my RV lifted higher. I could hear the gears groaning as my stomach churned. "Wait!" I yelled, my voice breaking as I ran toward the truck. "This is mine, you can't just take it." The driver didn't even glance my way. His expression blank, detached. "Mrs. Carter didn't budge, her faint smirk betraying her satisfaction. Anger surged through me. This was wrong. I wasn't some slob with a rusty clunker. I had every right to park where I wanted, to live without being judged over something so trivial. But Mrs. Carter and the HOA didn't care about rights, they cared about dominance, about deciding who fit in and who didn't. And in their eyes, I didn't. As my RV rolled away down the street, my pulse hammered, my mind spinning with rage and disbelief. This wasn't just about a vehicle, it was about being shoved out of a place I'd hoped to call home. Worse, they weren't just taking my RV, they were stripping away my security, my peace, my freedom to live on my terms. But they didn't know what they were dealing with. This wasn't just some beat-up camper. It was a link to a vanished world, a vessel that carried the echoes of a star's life within its walls. I wasn't about to let them steal that for a minute without a fight. The more I dwelled on it, the hotter my fury burned. How dare they treat me like this? How dare they snatch something so precious without even understanding its worth? They'd picked the wrong person to mess with, and I wasn't going to let them win. Watching my RV vanish around the corner, I felt helpless, a suffocating tightness gripping my chest. It wasn't just the loss of the RV, it was the injustice, the sense of being targeted by people who didn't know me or what mattered to me. They saw a vehicle on the street and made it their mission to erase it, oblivious to the memories it held, the freedom it represented. The quiet neighborhood I'd hoped would be my haven no longer felt welcome. It felt like a war zone where conformity ruled, and anyone who didn't conform was the enemy. The truth hit me hard. Pinewood Heights wasn't the idyllic community it pretended to be. It was a place where outsiders were crushed, where unspoken rules left no room for people like me or my RV. Stepping back into my house, I knew I couldn't let this go. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and dialed the HOA office, but all I got was a voicemail. Typical, they hid behind bureaucracy, dodging accountability. This wasn't a minor issue to me, though. That RV was my sanctuary, my escape, and now it was gone. I wouldn't let them get away with it. The next morning, I drove to the tow yard, determined to reclaim what was mine. It was a dingy lot on the edge of town, tucked behind a tall fence and tangled weeds, a graveyard for lost vehicles. The weight of the past day pressed down on me as I stormed up to the office, fury simmering. I demanded to see the manager, paid the fine, and got my RV back. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. They'd taken something from me, and I wasn't going to let it slide. DRIVYing my RV home. I knew this was far from over. Mrs. Carter might have won this round, but she'd ignited something in me. Over the next few days, I dove into research: HOA rules, resident rights, legal options. What I found was both encouraging and daunting. There were protections for people like me, but they were murky and tough to enforce. The HOA had a knack for wearing people down with red tape, making them feel powerless. But I wasn't going to bend. I couldn't do this alone, so I started talking to my neighbors. At first, they were wary, scared of the HOA's wrath. But slowly, a few opened up. The Thompsons told me how their kids were barred from the community pool for being too rowdy. Mrs. Singh shared how she'd been fined over and over for minor things no one else cared about. Mr. Lopez had been hassled for unsightly decorations on his porch. It wasn't just met, his was a pattern, a system of control targeting anyone who didn't fit their mold. The more I heard, the angrier I got. This wasn't about my RV Anna Maria, it was about a whole community bullied by a handful of power-hungry people. I began documenting everything: emails, calls, neighbor stories. This was my fight now, and I wasn't backing down. I spent weeks preparing, building a case against the HOA. Their practices weren't just unfair, they were illegal in ways I could prove. They had no idea what they'd unleashed. My first move was filing a formal complaint with the HOA, detailing every step of the ordeal: the towing, the notices, the overreach. I included photos, receipts, and emails, making it clear I wasn't some pushover they could ignore. The next week, I marched into their office, paperwork in hand. The air was thick with tension as I demanded a hearing with the board. The receptionist barely spoke, but I saw the flicker of unease in her eyes. They knew something big was brewing. In the days that followed, I rallied more neighbors. The Thompsons, Mrs. Singh and Mr. Lopez joined me, sharing their own battles. We formed a small alliance, meeting regularly to plan our next steps. We had to be smart, our case had to be ironclad. We recorded every HO interaction, every petty fine, every absurd rule, building a mountain of evidence. This wasn't just about our rights, it was about showing everyone they didn't have to live in fear. Then came the breakthrough. The HO agreed to a meeting. It was a small win, but it felt huge. I spent days prepping, ready for whatever they'd throw at me. The day arrived and I walked into that room with my heart racing, not from nerves, but from anticipation. Mrs. Carter sat at the head of the table, her face a blank slate, but I could sense her unease. The other board members sat stiffly, their usual smugness faltering. This was my moment. I laid out my case, starting with the RVOW. It wasn't a violation, how it was a piece of my history they tried to erase. Then I brought up my neighbors, the Thompsons' kids, Mrs. Singh's fines, Mr. Lopez's harassment. I showed them the laws they'd broken, the rights they trampled. The room grew tense, Mrs. Carter's grip tightening on her chair. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. They hadn't expected this, not me, not the evidence, not the community backing me. Mrs. Carter tried to push back, claiming the rules justified their actions, but her voice wavered. The board squirmed, their confidence crumbling. They offered a weak compromise: new rules for my RV, but I saw through it. It was a desperate grab to save face. I wasn't settling. The meeting ended without a clear resolution, but I'd shaken them. This was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, we turned up the heat. We filed complaints with local authorities, exposing the HOA's abuses. I contacted the media, and soon our story was everywhere. Neighbors who'd stayed silent started speaking out, emboldened by the growing spotlight. The pressure built, and the HOA's grip weakened. Former board members even came forward, spilling secrets about Mrs. Carter's scheme: secret meetings, targeted harassment, shady deals. The final blow landed when the board, battered by public outrage, agreed to step down and let the community elect new leaders. It was a crushing defeat for Mrs. Carter and a triumph for us. Pinewood Heights was free from their stranglehold. Standing with my RV back where it belonged, I felt pride swell. We hadn't just won a fight, we'd rewritten our community's future. We'd proven that even the smallest voices united could topple giants. For the first time in months, I could breathe again.